There's a special kind of heartbreak that comes from not knowing. For 5 years, the families of Nina, Celie, and Jo Whitlock have lived with that pain. 3 sisters who walked into the Montana mountains and simply disappeared. Search teams found nothing. The town gave up. But Valda Krane, a 62-year-old woman who knows loss herself, kept faith alive in her own quiet way. One cold morning, her dog Brynn stops dead on a remote trail and won't move. She's found something. Behind a wall of fallen rock, Valda discovers the impossible. The 3 sisters, alive but barely hanging on. They've been trapped in that cave for 5 years. But here's what nobody can explain. How did they survive? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Valda Krane had learned long ago that mountains remember everything. They remember the footsteps of miners who carved tunnels through their granite hearts. They remember the last words of climbers caught in sudden storms. And they remember the sister she lost 30 years ago, when a simple day hike turned into the defining tragedy of her life. Anna had been 26, full of that bright certainty young people carry like a torch. She'd wanted to photograph the wildflowers at Sentinel Peak, and Valda, 32 and more cautious even then, had gone along to keep her safe. But mountains don't care about intentions. A loose rock, a misstep, a fall that seemed to happen in slow motion, yet was over before Valda could even scream her sister's name. The compass she carried now had belonged to Anna. Brass, worn smooth by decades of Valda's thumb rubbing across its face. She kept it in her jacket pocket, a weight against her heart, a reminder that loving someone means carrying them forward even after they're gone. That loss had shaped everything that followed. Valda never married, never had children. She'd bought a small cabin on the outskirts of Granger Ridge, close enough to civilization for supplies, far enough that the silence felt intentional rather than lonely. She'd learned wilderness survival, search and rescue techniques, mountaineering, first aid. She'd made herself into someone who could help prevent other families from experiencing what hers had endured. And then, 5 years ago, the Whitlock sisters disappeared. Nina was 23 then, the oldest. Celie was 21. Jo, just 19, had graduated high school only a year before. They'd been visiting from Billings for the weekend, staying at their parents' vacation cabin near Coldwater Ridge. On a bright Saturday morning in June, they'd set out for a day hike. They never came back. Valda had been part of the initial search effort. She remembered the controlled chaos of those first 72 hours. Sheriff's deputies coordinating grid searches, volunteers from neighboring towns, arriving with thermoses of coffee and grim determination. The Whitlock parents' faces aging years in mere days. Helicopters had swept the ridgelines. Dogs had tracked scents to dead ends. They'd found one of Nina's hiking boots near Coldwater Creek, but nothing else. After 2 weeks, the official search was called off. After 2 months, the memorial service was held. After a year, most people in Granger Ridge had stopped talking about it, the way small towns learned to fold tragedy into their history and keep moving forward. But Valda hadn't stopped. She'd kept copies of the search maps, marked with her own theories and observations. She'd hiked every trail within 10 miles of where that boot was found, looking for anything the official search might have missed. She'd studied the area's history, learning about the old mining operations, the network of tunnels that honeycombed the mountain's interior like a secret nervous system. People thought she was obsessed, and maybe she was. But she preferred to think of it as devoted. Some people devoted themselves to careers or hobbies. Valda devoted herself to making sure no family went through what hers had, if she could possibly prevent it. Her cabin was simple, 1 bedroom, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a porch that faced east to catch the sunrise. No television, just a radio for weather reports. Books lined the walls, field guides, survival manuals, local history. A wood stove kept her warm through the long Montana winters. Solar panels charged her essential electronics. She could have lived anywhere, but she'd chosen to stay here, at the edge of wilderness, close to the mountains that had taken her sister. Brynn had come into her life 8 years ago. Valda had found her at the county shelter, a shepherd mix, maybe 3 years old, with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament that suggested she'd been someone's well-loved pet before circumstances changed. The shelter staff said she'd been brought in by a family moving out of state who couldn't take her along. Their loss became Valda's gain. She'd trained Brynn in basic search and rescue skills. The dog had a natural aptitude for it, and more importantly, she seemed to understand when Valda needed companionship and when she needed quiet. On their long hikes together, and they hiked almost daily, weather permitting, Brynn stayed close but not clingy, alert but not anxious. She was the kind of partner Valda needed, reliable, steady, present. The leather collar Brynn wore was showing its age now, the stitching frayed in places, the brass buckle tarnished. Valda kept meaning to replace it, but something about its weathered familiarity felt right. Like Anna's compass, it was a marker of time past, of miles traveled together. Sheriff Lincoln Watts had been in his position for 12 years, and he'd learned to respect Valda's instincts even when they seemed far-fetched. He was 58, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent more time outdoors than behind a desk. His wife had died of cancer 6 years ago, and he understood something about how grief could refocus a life, give it new purpose, or take away old meaning, depending on how you let it settle. He'd never discouraged Valda's continued interest in the Whitlock case, even when other deputies rolled their eyes at her theories. Once or twice a year, she'd bring him something she'd found, a torn piece of fabric that turned out to be years old, a marking on a tree that was just natural scarring. He'd always taken the time to listen, to thank her for her diligence, to gently explain when something led nowhere. The Whitlock parents, Marcus and June, had aged terribly in those 5 years. Marcus had been a robust man in his 50s, a dentist in Billings, with a weekend cabin where he'd raised his daughters to love the mountains. Now he looked 70, his hair gone completely white, his shoulders permanently hunched, as if bracing against a wind that never stopped blowing. June had withdrawn into herself, speaking little, moving through the world like a ghost, visiting places she used to know. They'd stopped coming to the cabin after the first year. Too painful. They'd talked about selling it, but neither could quite bring themselves to make that final severance. So it sat empty most months, a monument to before, when their daughters had been alive, and their biggest concern was whether the girls would remember to call when they got back to the city. Valda had met them several times over the years. They knew her as the woman who kept looking, who believed, or at least acted like she believed, that answers existed somewhere in these mountains. They'd been polite but distant, the way people are, with someone who reminds them of the worst thing that ever happened. Granger Ridge itself was small, even by Montana standards. Maybe 400 permanent residents. Double that when summer tourists came for fishing and hiking. Main Street had a general store, a diner, a post office, a bar called the Timber Lodge, where locals gathered on Friday nights. Everyone knew everyone, which meant everyone knew everyone's business and everyone's sorrow. The morning of November 8th started like most mornings in Valda's life. She woke at dawn, made coffee in her percolator, ate oatmeal with dried berries she'd gathered the previous autumn. She checked the weather, cold but clear, temperature in the high 20s, no precipitation expected. Good hiking weather if you dressed right. She packed her day bag with practiced efficiency. Water, energy bars, first aid kit, emergency blanket, headlamp, whistle, knife, rope, the detailed topographic maps she'd annotated over the years. Anna's compass went in her jacket pocket. She dressed in layers, thermal base, fleece, waterproof shell. Good boots, well broken in. Hat and gloves. Brynn was already waiting by the door, tail wagging slowly, that look of patient anticipation dogs get when they know something good is coming. Valda clipped the worn leather collar around her neck, attached the lead, and they set out into the morning. The trail she'd chosen that day was one she'd hiked dozens of times, a moderate loop that took about 4 hours at her pace, winding through pine forest and aspen groves. climbing to a small overlook before descending back toward her cabin. Nothing unusual about it. Nothing that should have been different from any other morning hike in the past 5 years. But about 90 minutes in, as they approached a section of trail near the base of Coldwater Ridge, Brynn stopped walking. At first, Valda thought Brynn had simply caught an interesting scent, a deer maybe, or the remnants of a coyote's passing. Dogs had their own priorities on hikes, their own complex map of smells that meant more to them than any human trail marker. "Come on, girl," Valda said, giving the lead a gentle tug. Brynn didn't move. She stood rigid, ears forward, staring at a section of forest that looked no different from any other. Pine trees, scattered rocks, the usual undergrowth of kinnikinnick and beargrass. Valda stopped pulling and watched. Brynn was whining now, a soft, insistent sound. She took a few steps off the trail, then looked back at Valda as if to say, "Pay attention. What is it?" Valda asked, knowing the dog couldn't answer, but needing to voice the question anyway. Brynn moved farther from the trail, picking her way between trees. Valda followed, scanning the ground for whatever had caught her attention. Animal tracks, blood, some sign of distress. Then Brynn started digging. Not the casual, recreational digging dogs sometimes do, but focused, purposeful excavation. Her front paws worked at a pile of rocks and fallen branches, sending small stones scattering. "Brynn, stop!" Valda commanded, but the dog ignored her completely. That alone was remarkable. Brynn was a well-trained animal who always obeyed voice commands. Always. Valda knelt beside her, and that's when she noticed something odd about the rock pile. It looked natural at first glance, the kind of debris that accumulates when a small slide occurs. But the more she studied it, the more it seemed arranged, not random, deliberate. She began moving rocks herself, larger ones Brynn couldn't shift. As she cleared them, a gap appeared, dark space behind the stones, suggesting a void beyond. A cave entrance or maybe a mine shaft. Plenty of both in these mountains. Her hands were cold despite her gloves, clumsy as she worked. Brynn continued digging beside her, more frantic now. And then Valda saw it, caught on a jagged edge of rock, fluttering slightly in the breeze that carried from the darkness beyond. A bandana. Red faded but recognizable. She'd seen it in photographs. In the missing persons reports she'd studied until she could recite them from memory. Nina Whitlock always wore a red bandana when she hiked. Valda's heart hammered against her ribs. Her breath came in short gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion. 5 years. 5 years of searching, and now this. She pulled out her flashlight with shaking hands, aimed it into the gap she'd created. The beam penetrated maybe 20 feet before being swallowed by darkness. But in that limited illumination, she could see that this wasn't a natural cave. The walls were too regular, showing marks of tools. An old mine tunnel, probably from the Coldwater operations in the 70s. "Hello?" Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder. "Is anyone there? Can you hear me?" Silence. Just the whisper of wind through pine branches and Brynn's panting beside her. Valda cleared more rocks, working faster now, making the opening larger. She called out again. "My name is Valda Krane. I'm a search and rescue volunteer. If you can hear me, make a sound." Any sound. This time she heard something. Faint, so faint she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. A scraping sound. Movement, then a voice, barely above a whisper, hoarse from disuse or dehydration or both. "Help!" Every hair on Valda's body stood up. She leaned closer to the opening, aiming her flashlight deeper. "I hear you," she called. "Stay calm. I'm going to get you out. How many of you are there?" No response. She waited, counting her heartbeats. 20, 30, 40. Then 3. Valda had to brace herself against the rocks to keep from collapsing. 3. The Whitlock sisters. All 3. After 5 years, they were alive. Her mind raced through protocols. She was trained for this. Search and rescue, emergency response. She needed to assess the situation, ensure safety, call for backup. But her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unzip her pack to get her satellite phone. "Listen to me carefully," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "My name is Valda. I'm going to call for help right now, and then I'm going to come in there with you. Are you hurt? Is anyone injured?" Another long pause. Then the weak voice again. We can't move much. Been so long. That's okay. You don't need to move. Just stay where you are. Help is coming. Valda pulled out her satellite phone and dialed Sheriff Watt's direct line. It rang 3 times, each ring feeling like an eternity, before he answered. Watts, Lincoln, it's Valda. I found them. I found the Whitlock sisters. A pause. What? I'm at Coldwater Ridge, about half a mile south of the main trail. There's a mine entrance partially collapsed. They're inside. All 3 of them, Lincoln. They're alive. She could hear him processing this, the impossibility of it. You're certain? I heard them. They spoke to me. We need emergency response, medical teams, rescue equipment. The entrance is mostly blocked. They're going to need help getting out. Stay on the line. I'm mobilizing everyone now. Valda heard him shouting to others, heard the sudden scramble of activity. He came back on the line. Teams are rolling. ETA 45 minutes. Valda, are you safe where you are? Yes, I'm going inside to be with them. No, wait for Lincoln. They've been alone in the dark for 5 years. I'm not making them wait another 45 minutes to hear another human voice. She ended the call before he could argue further. She knew it was against protocol. She knew it was potentially dangerous. Old mines were unstable, could collapse further, could have bad air or other hazards. But protocol hadn't saved these girls. Procedure hadn't found them, and she would not leave them alone 1 second longer than necessary. She tied Brynn's lead to a sturdy tree trunk. Stay, girl. Good dog. Stay. Then she squeezed through the opening she'd made, her flashlight held in front of her, and entered the darkness where 3 sisters had survived the impossible. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, the walls rough-hewn stone, showing the marks of drilling and blasting from decades past. Valda's flashlight beam swept across support timbers that had rotted in places, across patches of moisture seeping through cracks in the rock. The air smelled of earth and stone, and something else, a smell she recognized from her search and rescue training. Humans who'd been in one place too long. I'm coming to you, she called out. Keep talking to me so I know where you are. Here. The voice was stronger now, or maybe just closer. We're back here. Valda moved carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. The floor was uneven, scattered with rubble and debris. About 40 feet from the entrance, her light found them. 3 figures huddled together against the far wall of a chamber. They were so thin, they barely seemed real, skeletal, their clothes hanging off them like fabric draped over wire frames. Their skin was pale in a way that suggested they hadn't seen sunlight in years. Their hair was long, matted, growing in the darkness without scissors or care, but their eyes were alive, squinting against Valda's flashlight, adjusting to brightness they'd almost forgotten existed. Oh my God, Valda breathed. She moved toward them, then stopped, not wanting to overwhelm them. Nina? Celie? Jo? The figure in the middle, slightly taller than the others, nodded weakly. Nina, she whispered. You know us. Everyone knows you. Everyone's been looking for you. Valda's voice broke. You're going home. Do you understand? You're going home today. The 3 sisters looked at each other, and something passed between them that Valda couldn't quite read. Relief, yes, but also something else. Fear, confusion, disbelief. She knelt a few feet away from them, close enough to talk without shouting, but far enough to give them space. I'm Valda Krane. I live near here. My dog found you. She wouldn't leave this spot, wouldn't stop digging. Help is coming. Rescue teams, medical people, everyone. They'll be here soon. We tried, Jo said suddenly. She was the youngest, her voice thin and strange. We tried to get out. We tried so hard at first. Valda saw it now, the marks on the stones near the entrance, where they must have clawed and scraped, trying to move rocks that were too heavy. Dried blood on the walls where fingers had broken and bled. I know, Valda said softly. I know you tried, but you're going to be okay now. Can you tell me, are any of you injured? Broken bones? Infections? Anything the medical team should know about? Nina shook her head slowly. Weak, so weak. Haven't stood up in maybe a year. Maybe longer. That's okay. They'll carry you out. You don't have to do anything except stay calm and let us help. Celie spoke for the first time. You're real, aren't you? This isn't another dream? The question pierced Valda's heart. I'm real. This is real. I promise you. She heard sounds from outside, vehicles, voices, equipment being unloaded. The rescue operation was beginning. Within minutes, the small chamber flooded with people, emergency medical technicians, rescue specialists with proper gear for extraction. Sheriff Watts himself, squeezing through the entrance. Valda moved back to give them room to work. She watched as medical professionals did rapid assessments, checked vital signs, started IV lines to begin rehydration. She listened as rescue coordinators discussed the safest way to extract 3 people who couldn't walk, whose bones might be dangerously fragile after years of malnutrition. Sheriff Watts found her standing against the wall, watching it all unfold. "You did it," he said quietly. "I didn't think—" He stopped, shook his head. "You actually found them." "Brynn found them," Valda corrected. "I just listened." 5 years, Watts said. How the hell did they survive 5 years? It was the question Valda had been asking herself since she'd first seen them. They were emaciated, yes, but they were conscious, coherent, alive. By all logic, they shouldn't be. Without food, without light, sealed in a mineshaft, nobody survived that, nobody. "There must be something we're missing," she said. "A water source, maybe. Some way to catch insects or rodents, something." The extraction took 3 hours. They brought in specialized stretchers, reinforced the tunnel entrance, set up proper lighting. One by one, the sisters were carried out into daylight they hadn't seen in half a decade. Medical helicopters waited in a clearing half a mile away, ready to transport them to Billings. Valda emerged last, blinking in the afternoon sun. Brynn bounded to her immediately, tail wagging, clearly proud of herself. "Good girl," Valda murmured, scratching behind her ears. Such a good girl. She watched as Jo was loaded into the first helicopter, then Celie into the second. Nina was last, and as the EMTs prepared to lift her stretcher, she turned her head toward Valda. "Thank you," Nina said, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotors. "You found us." He said nobody would. The words sent a chill through Valda. He said nobody would. Before she could ask who he was, Nina was being lifted into the helicopter, and the door was sliding closed. Sheriff Watts appeared at her elbow. "We need your full statement. Everything you saw, everything you heard, every detail." "I know. This isn't over, Valda. This is just starting. We need to figure out what happened, how they survived, and most importantly," he paused, his jaw tight, "we need to figure out if this was an accident or if someone put them there." Valda looked back at the mine entrance, now surrounded by sheriff's deputies and federal investigators who'd arrived in the past hour. Crime scene tape was being strung up. Evidence markers were being placed. What had started as a rescue was transforming into an investigation. The entrance was sealed, she said. "Not collapsed, sealed. Someone stacked those rocks deliberately." Watts nodded grimly. "I saw. That's why the FBI is already on their way. This might be a crime scene, and those girls might be the only witnesses to what could be attempted murder." 3 days after the rescue, Valda found herself in Billings, walking through the corridors of St. Vincent Regional Hospital. Sheriff Watts had arranged for her to visit the sisters. Specifically, Nina had requested to see her. The hospital had established tight security around their rooms, keeping media and curious onlookers at bay. The story had gone national within hours. 3 sisters found alive after 5 years, the impossible survival that defied explanation. Dr. Felix Strand met Valda outside the ICU ward. He was in his early 50s, with the kind face of someone who'd learned to deliver difficult news with compassion. "They're making progress," he said, shaking Valda's hand. "Physically, at least. Psychologically, we're only beginning to understand what they've been through. Can you explain how they survived?" Valda asked. "I've been thinking about it non-stop, and I can't make the math work." Dr. Strand gestured for her to follow him to a small consultation room. He pulled up charts on a computer screen, showing lab results and medical imaging. "Neither can we, to be honest. By every metric we have, they shouldn't have survived more than a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, at the absolute outside. But here they are, so what kept them alive?" Water, for one thing. There's an underground spring in that chamber. We sent a team back to document everything. It's clean water, which is miraculous in itself. That solves hydration, which is critical. But nutrition? He shook his head. They show severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, muscle wasting, all consistent with prolonged starvation. But somehow they had just enough calories to keep their bodies functioning. From what? That's what we can't figure out. We found evidence of moss in their digestive systems. Some kind of cave fungus, beetle exoskeletons. It's possible they developed a subsistence system, eating insects, cultivating moss, maybe even mushrooms growing in the dark. But the calories from that should not have been sufficient. Valda thought about the chamber, the darkness, the 5 years. What about their eyes? Their ability to speak, to think clearly? The darkness didn't blind them, though their eyes will need time to readjust. Their cognitive function is remarkably intact, given the sensory deprivation. They kept each other sane, I think. Human connection, even in hell, makes a difference. He paused, pulled up another document on his screen. There's something else. Something I can't explain and frankly makes me uncomfortable. What? Their bodies show adaptation. Not just survival, but actual physiological adaptation to the environment. Their pupils dilate far more than normal. They'd become extremely sensitive to any trace of light. Their hearing is abnormally acute. And there's something in their blood chemistry we're still trying to understand. A compound we can't quite identify. Valda leaned forward. What kind of compound? We don't know. It's organic, definitely produced by something they ingested. Our best guess is some kind of fungus or bacteria unique to that environment. It might have slowed their metabolism, helped their bodies conserve energy. It's like nothing I've seen in 30 years of medicine. Can I see Nina now? Dr. Strand nodded. She's been asking for you specifically. Be gentle, she's still very weak. And if she says anything that seems important to the investigation, please make note of it. Sheriff Watts is coordinating with the FBI, and they'll want to interview you again. Nina's room was private, at the end of a quiet hallway. A deputy sat outside the door, nodding at Valda as she entered. The room was dim, curtains drawn to protect Nina's sensitive eyes. Medical equipment beeped softly, monitoring heart rate and oxygen levels. Nina lay in the hospital bed, propped up slightly. She'd gained maybe 5 pounds since the rescue, but she still looked impossibly fragile. Her dark hair had been washed and combed. Someone had brought her real clothes instead of a hospital gown, soft pajamas that actually fit. Valda, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in the cave. You came. Of course I came. Valda pulled a chair close to the bed. How are you feeling? Like I'm learning to be human again. Nina's smile was wan but genuine. Everything is so bright, so loud. The nurse brought me pudding yesterday and I cried because I'd forgotten what vanilla tasted like. That will get easier. Will it? Nina's eyes, still adjusting, still dilating too much, fixed on Valda's face. You lost someone in these mountains. I can tell. The way you looked at us in that cave. That wasn't just a rescuer doing her job. Valda touched the compass in her pocket instinctively. My sister. 30 years ago. A hiking accident. I'm sorry. Don't be. You're alive. That's what matters now. Nina was quiet for a moment, her fingers picking at the blanket. You heard what I said, didn't you? When they were putting me in the helicopter? About someone saying nobody would find you? Yes. Nina's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told the doctors or the FBI agents. But I'll only tell you. Valda felt a chill run down her spine. Why me? Because you understand what it's like to lose someone to the mountains. And because you didn't give up looking when everyone else did. That means you'll believe me when I tell you the truth, even if it sounds impossible. I'm listening. Nina took a shaky breath. We weren't trapped in that cave by accident. Someone put us there. Someone we knew and trusted. And Valda, her voice cracked. He didn't just seal us in and leave. He came back. Multiple times over the years. He brought us just enough to survive. Just enough to keep us alive, but not enough to let us escape. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Valda's mind reeled with the implications. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't even a murder attempt gone wrong. This was something far worse, deliberate, prolonged captivity. Who? Valda asked. "Who did this to you?" Nina's eyes filled with tears. "Our uncle, Uncle Terence, my father's brother. And the worst part, he told us he was doing it to save us, that keeping us in the dark was the only way to protect everyone else." Valda sat motionless as Nina's words echoed in the dim hospital room. Uncle Terence, a family member, someone the sisters had trusted enough to follow into the wilderness. Protect everyone from what? Valda finally asked. Nina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's the part that sounds insane. He talked about something living in the mountain. Something old. Something that demands payment. Payment. Lives. Or not lives exactly, but consciousness. Awareness held in the darkness. He said it was sleeping, and if it woke up without being satisfied, it would consume everything in the valley. He said his family had been keeping it fed for generations." Valda kept her expression neutral, though her mind was racing. This sounded like the delusion of a deeply disturbed man, but disturbed didn't mean harmless. If anything, it made him more dangerous. "Did you believe him?" Nina's laugh was bitter. "At first, no. We thought he'd just snapped. Gone crazy. But Valda, we were down there for 5 years. 5 years of darkness so complete you forget what light looks like. And there were times," she paused, struggling with how to articulate it. "There were times when we felt something. All 3 of us. Something vast and patient waiting beneath us. Sensory deprivation can cause hallucinations," Valda said gently. "I know. I've told myself that. But we all felt the same things at the same times. We all had the same dreams. And the way Uncle Terence talked about it, he wasn't trying to convince us. He spoke like someone stating facts, like he was teaching us something we needed to know." Valda pulled out her phone. "I need to share this with Sheriff Watts. Do you know where Terence is now?" "No, he stopped coming about 6 months ago. We thought maybe he'd died, or maybe he'd decided to let us die. The food he'd been leaving, it just stopped. We were living on water, and whatever we could find in the dark when you showed up." "What kind of food did he bring?" "Energy bars. Sometimes dried fruit. Once fresh bread that made me sob because I could smell the yeast. Never enough to truly satisfy us. Just enough to keep us functional." Valda stood, already texting Watts. This changed everything. This wasn't a mystery. It was a manhunt. "Nina, you did the right thing telling me. The FBI needs to hear this directly from you. They'll want every detail you can remember about Terence. What he looked like, what he said, anything that might help them find him." "Will they believe me?" "About the other part? They'll believe you were held captive by someone who had delusions. That's enough to prosecute." After leaving the hospital, Valda drove to the Granger Ridge Public Library. It was a small building, but it housed the town's historical society records. If Terence Whitlock had been involved with the old Coldwater mine, there might be documentation. The librarian, Mrs. Paulson, remembered Valda from previous visits over the years. "Still researching local history?" she asked. "Always," Valda said. "I'm looking for employment records from the Coldwater Silver mine, specifically from the 1970s and early 1980s. Mrs. Paulson led her to a back room where cardboard boxes held decades of documents that had never been properly digitized. "Mining company went bankrupt in 83, she said. "Most of their records ended up here. Help yourself." Valda spent 4 hours going through files. She found payroll records, safety incident reports, geological surveys, and finally she found what she was looking for. Terence Whitlock had worked at Coldwater from 1977 to 1982. He'd been a driller, working in the deepest sections of the mine. More interesting were the incident reports from his final year. Multiple complaints from co-workers about his behavior. He'd started talking about hearing voices underground. He'd refused to work in certain tunnels, claiming they were occupied. He'd been written up for confronting management about sealing what should stay sealed. In October 1982, there was a note that he'd been terminated for erratic behavior and making threats. 1 month later, the mine closed permanently after a collapse, killed 2 workers. Valda photographed every relevant page with her phone, then found something else that made her pulse quicken. Tucked into the back of a folder was an old geological survey map from 1967, showing the full extent of the mine's tunnel system. Someone, probably someone from the Historical Society, had made pencil annotations on it. Recent annotations, the writing crisp and clear. The annotations marked multiple entry points, ventilation shafts, and in the lowest section of the map, someone had circled an area and written, "Lower chamber, do not enter." She photographed this too, then looked more closely. The handwriting seemed masculine, the letters careful and deliberate. At the bottom of the map, in smaller script, "Last checked March 2023, 2 years ago." Someone had been maintaining an interest in these tunnels recently. Valda took the map to Mrs. Paulson. "Do you know who might have annotated this?" The librarian squinted at it. "Could be Gordon Phelps. He comes in sometimes researching mining history. He actually worked at Coldwater back in the day. Is he still in town? Lives up on Aspen Road. White house with blue shutters. Can't miss it. Gordon Phelps was 78, with the alert eyes of someone whose mind had stayed sharp, even as his body aged. He invited Valda into his living room, which was lined with bookshelves and framed photographs from his mining days. "I remember when those girls disappeared," he said, after Valda explained her visit. "And I remember thinking at the time that someone should check the old tunnels. But nobody listened to an old man's paranoia. Tell me about Terence Whitlock." Gordon's expression darkened. "Worked with him for about 3 years. Started out normal enough. Good worker, strong, reliable. But something happened to him down there. He got assigned to a deep exploratory tunnel. We were looking for a new silver vein, and when he came back up after that first week, he was different. Different how? Scared. And not the normal kind of scared you get from dangerous work. This was existential terror. He said they'd found something in the deep section, a chamber that wasn't on any map. Natural formation, but with walls so smooth they looked worked. And at the center, a stone formation, he said, felt wrong. Made the air heavy. Made his ears ring. "Did you see this chamber?" "Management sealed it before I could. Said it was unstable. But I heard the other workers talk. They all felt it too. Something off about that space. Most of them refused to go back down after that." Valda showed him the annotated map. "Is this your handwriting?" Gordon studied it, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I go out there sometimes. Not into the mine, I'm too old for that. But I check the entrances. Make sure they're still sealed. I may be paranoid, but after what happened to Terence, I figure someone should keep an eye on it. What happened to him after he was fired? Disappeared. Just vanished one day. His family looked for him, filed missing person reports, but nothing. I always figured he went back into those tunnels and never came out." "He's alive," Valda said. "And he's the one who trapped his nieces in that mine." Gordon's face went pale. "Jesus Christ. All this time he's been out there?" "Looks that way. And according to Nina, he believes he's protecting people from something in the mountain." Gordon was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to one of his bookshelves, and pulled down an old leather-bound journal. "You should see this," he said. The journal Gordon handed Valda was worn, its pages yellowed with age. "I found this in Terence's locker after he was fired," Gordon said. "Management cleaned out his stuff, threw most of it away. I kept this, thinking maybe his family would want it someday. Never got around to tracking them down." Valda opened it carefully. The entries began in neat, measured handwriting, dated entries from 1979, describing normal workdays, observations about geology, mundane complaints about management. But as the pages progressed, the writing changed. The letters grew more erratic, pressed harder into the paper. Words were underlined multiple times. Some pages had sketches, abstract symbols, geometric patterns that made Valda's eyes hurt if she stared too long. She read aloud from an entry dated June 15th, 1980. "Found the deep room today. Edwards said it was just a natural cavity, but he's lying to himself. Those walls are too smooth, too deliberate. And the formation at the center, it's not a stalagmite. It's shaped, intentional. When I stood next to it, I could hear something. Not with my ears, with something deeper. It's been here so long, waiting, patient." Gordon sat down heavily in his armchair. "Keep reading. It gets worse." July 1980. "The others feel it too, but they won't admit it. They joke about it, call it the creeps, but I see their faces when we work near the deep room. Nobody stays down there longer than they have to. Johnson requested a transfer to surface operations. Said his wife thought he was acting strange. He is, we all are. How can you be normal when you've stood in the presence of something that vast? September 1980, management wants to seal the deep room. They won't say why, but I know. They feel it too. Better men than us have known about it. This mine wasn't dug randomly. They were looking for it. The company records go back to the 1940s, but I found older maps in the historical archives. This site has been marked for 150 years, maybe longer. December 1980. It spoke to me last night. Not words, impressions, needs. It's been sleeping so long, but sleep isn't death. It dreams, and in its dreams it reaches out. It needs awareness, consciousness, life force held in the dark to keep it satisfied. Otherwise, it will wake fully. And if it wakes, it will feed. Valda looked up at Gordon. This is the delusion Nina described. He thought something in the mind needed human sacrifice. Keep reading, Gordon said grimly. March 1981. I understand now why my family settled in this valley. Great-grandfather knew. His father before him. There's always been someone who understood the covenant. Someone who ensured the balance was maintained. Small offerings. Lives spent in darkness. Tragic, yes, but necessary to protect hundreds. I am the guardian now. The responsibility falls to me. The entries after that became increasingly difficult to read, both because of the deteriorating handwriting and the disturbing content. Terence described researching his family history, discovering that several ancestors had died under mysterious circumstances in the mountains. He became convinced there was a pattern, a tradition of guardianship passed down through generations. The final entry was dated October 1982. They fired me today, called me unstable, threatened to have me committed if I keep talking about the deep room. But I can't stop. I can't abandon the covenant. If I do, we all suffer. I'll find another way. I'll continue the work, even if it means doing it alone. Valda closed the journal, her hands shaking slightly. He really believed it. This wasn't just mental illness. He built an entire mythology around his delusions. The question, Gordon said, is whether there was anything real that triggered those delusions. I worked in that mine for 20 years. I've been in a lot of strange places underground, and I'm telling you that deep room felt wrong. Maybe it's just geology, unusual mineral deposits, subsonic vibrations from deep faults. Or maybe, he stopped, seemingly unwilling to finish the thought. Maybe what? Maybe some places are just bad, not evil in a supernatural sense, but locations where something about the geology or the history creates a psychological effect. People are suggestible. If you go into a place expecting to feel something, you will. And if you're already unstable, that feeling can tip you into full delusion. Valda thought about Nina's description of feeling watched in the darkness. 3 people experiencing the same sensations. Was that shared reality or shared suggestion? Her phone buzzed. Sheriff Watts. She answered immediately. Valda, we need you at the station. FBI wants to interview you about everything Nina told you. And we got a hit on Terence Whitlock. Security footage from the hospital in Billings? He's been there multiple times, watching the girls' floor. When? Most recent was yesterday. He's still in the area. 2 hours later, Valda sat in a conference room at the Granger Ridge Sheriff's Office. Present were Sheriff Watts, FBI agent Simone Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, and 2 other federal agents whose names Valda immediately forgot in the intensity of the discussion. Agent Hayes had a laptop open, showing enhanced security footage from the hospital. A gaunt man in his 60s, with unkempt grey hair and a beard, wearing nondescript outdoor clothing. He moved through the corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged there, though he clearly didn't. This is Terence Whitlock, Hayes said. We've confirmed through facial recognition. He's been accessing the hospital using stolen visitor credentials. Hospital security is now on alert, but he hasn't returned since yesterday. He's checking on them, Valda said, making sure they're alive, or planning to finish what he started, Watts countered. Hayes pulled up another document. We've been investigating similar cases across the western United States. Over the past 15 years, there have been 7 other incidents where individuals were found in remote caves or abandoned mines after extended periods. All survived impossibly long. All reported experiences similar to what the Whitlock sisters described. Valda leaned forward. You think Terence is responsible for those too? We don't know, but the pattern suggests either a serial predator with a very specific methodology or multiple individuals operating under similar delusions. We're calling it cognitive contagion, an idea so powerful it spreads to vulnerable individuals and manifests in similar behaviors. What about the places themselves? The chambers where people are found? Hayes exchanged glances with her colleagues. That's classified, but I'll tell you this much. Every location shares certain geological characteristics. Unusual mineral deposits, deep faults, areas where electromagnetic fields are measurably different. Whether that's correlation or causation, we don't know. So you're saying these places might actually affect people? I'm saying science doesn't have all the answers yet. And I'm saying Terence Whitlock, whatever his motivations, has committed multiple felonies and needs to be apprehended before he hurts anyone else. They showed Valda dozens of photos, asked her to identify any locations she recognized. Most were from areas she'd never seen. But one photo made her pause, an entrance to a mine tunnel, partially concealed by brush. She knew that location. It was marked on the annotated map Gordon had shown her. This one, she said. I know where this is. About 2 miles from where we found the sisters. It's supposed to be sealed, but if Terence has been accessing the mine system for years, he'd know all the entrances. Hayes finished. Can you guide us there? Yes. Good. We're assembling a tactical team. We go in at dawn. The tactical team assembled before dawn in a staging area 3 miles from the target entrance. Federal agents in tactical gear, local sheriff's deputies who knew the terrain, a specialized cave rescue unit, and Valda, who'd been deputized temporarily as a guide. They reviewed maps, checked equipment, established communication protocols. Agent Hayes briefed the team. Our objective is to locate and apprehend Terence Whitlock. Secondary objective is to document any evidence related to the Whitlock sisters' captivity and any other potential victims. The mine system is extensive and unstable. Nobody goes anywhere alone. Nobody takes unnecessary risks. As the sky lightened to gray, they moved out. Valda led them along a trail that existed more in her memory than on any map, through pine forest and over rocky outcroppings, until they reached a hillside covered in scrub brush. She pushed aside the vegetation, revealing an opening barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. This is it, she said. The map showed this entrance was sealed in 1983, but someone's been using it. The entrance tunnel descended steeply, requiring careful climbing over loose rock. They activated helmet lights, the beams cutting through darkness that felt somehow thicker than normal shadow. The temperature dropped quickly as they descended, their breath becoming visible. After 30 minutes of careful progress, the tunnel opened into a larger passage, clearly part of the original mining operation, with rotted timbers and rusted rail tracks. Agent Hayes ordered the team to spread out and document everything. Crime scene specialists began photographing, collecting samples, marking locations on digital maps. They found evidence of recent human presence, water bottles with dates from the past 2 years, food wrappers, a sleeping bag in a small alcove, and most disturbing, a stack of journals similar to the one Gordon had shown Valda. Hayes carefully bagged the journals while Valda looked over her shoulder. The writing was Terence's, documenting decades of activity. Entries describing his first victims in the 1980s, his methodology evolving over the years, his growing certainty that he was fulfilling a sacred duty. But there was something else in these journals, references to others. Father understood, one entry read. Grandfather before him. The covenant is old. We are not its creators, only its servants. His family, Valda said. He believed this was passed down through generations. Shared delusion or conspiracy? Hayes mused. Either way, it's deeply disturbing. They continued deeper, following the main tunnel system. The specialized equipment the team carried began acting strangely. Compass needles spinning erratically, radio communications filling with static. A geologist on the team noted unusual mineral deposits in the walls, taking samples. "These formations are rare," the geologist said. "Heavy concentrations of magnetite and pyrrhotite could definitely affect electromagnetic fields. Might explain some of the equipment issues." They reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Valda consulted the annotated map on her phone. The lower chamber should be down the left passage. That's what the map indicated. Hayes divided the team. One group would continue to the lower chamber. Another would explore the right passage. A third would remain at the junction as a safety anchor. Valda went with Hayes' group toward the lower chamber. The passage narrowed, forcing them to move single file. The walls bore marks of old drilling, but they also showed something else: ancient petroglyphs, barely visible under centuries of mineral deposits. Human figures, abstract symbols, something that might be a sun or a spiral or something else entirely. "These predate the mine," Hayes said, photographing them. "This site has been significant for a very long time." The passage opened into a vast chamber, so large their lights couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling. At the center stood a stone formation that nature hadn't created. It was roughly cylindrical, about 8 feet tall. Its surface covered in the same kind of symbols they'd seen on the walls. The air here felt different, heavier, making it hard to take deep breaths. Every member of the team felt it. Valda saw it in their faces, an instinctive unease, a primal response to something their conscious minds couldn't quite identify. "This is it," she said quietly. "This is what drove Terence mad." They approached the formation carefully, documenting everything. The ground around it showed signs of repeated human presence. Worn paths in the stone dust, arranged rocks forming what might be ritual circles, and photographs. Recent photographs laid out in a specific pattern. Photographs of the Whitlock sisters. Hayes knelt to examine them without touching. "He's been here recently, very recently." A sound echoed through the chamber, not from their group. Footsteps, approaching from a passage on the far side. Everyone's weapons came up, lights converging on the darkness. Terence Whitlock emerged into the light, hands raised. He looked even more gaunt than in the hospital footage, his clothes hanging off him, his eyes sunken but intensely focused. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I've been waiting." "Terence Whitlock," Hayes called out, "you're under arrest. Get on the ground now." He didn't move to comply, but he didn't flee either. He simply stood there, looking at Valda with something like recognition. "You found them. You're the woman with the dog. You broke the cycle. The only cycle you created was one of suffering," Valda said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "You hurt those girls. You hurt others before them." "I saved them," Terence said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. "I saved everyone. The Covenant requires life in the deep, consciousness held in the dark. Without it, the sleeper rises. My family has maintained this balance for 5 generations. 5 generations of sacrifice to protect this valley, this region, everyone who lives here oblivious to what sleeps beneath their feet." "There is no sleeper," Hayes said firmly. "There's only your delusion and the real crimes you've committed." Terence's laugh was bitter. "You feel it, don't you?" "Standing here, you all feel it. The weight, the attention of something vast and patient. This chamber wasn't dug by miners. They found it. My great-great-grandfather found it in 1871, before there was even a town here. The mountain revealed it to him, showed him what slept in the deep places, made him understand the price of keeping it dormant." As he spoke, a low rumble passed through the chamber, subtle but unmistakable. Dust fell from above. The stone formation seemed to resonate with the vibration. The geologist checked his instruments. Seismic activity. Minor tremor, probably from the fault line that runs under this area. But Terence smiled as if vindicated. "It knows. It always knows when the balance is broken. You took them from the darkness too soon. They were meant to complete 7 years. 7 years of consciousness offering its sustenance. Now the debt is unpaid, and it will collect in its own way." Another tremor, stronger this time. Rocks fell from the chamber ceiling. Hayes shouted orders. "Everyone out, now! This chamber is unstable." But Terence didn't run. He walked toward the stone formation, speaking as he moved. "I didn't want to hurt them. I love those girls. Nina, Celie, Jo. They're my brother's children. But someone had to be the guardian. Someone had to maintain what our ancestors started. The weight of it destroyed my father, but I tried to bear it. I tried to do what was necessary." He reached the formation, pressed his palms against it. The other victims, Amanda Voss, Richard Chen, the Morrison siblings, all of them, they fulfilled their terms. Years in the dark, and then release through death. Natural death, peaceful in the end, their consciousness slowly absorbed into the sleeper's dreams. But I couldn't let my nieces die. I kept them alive too long, hoping for another way. And now, the tremor that struck then was no minor shake. It was violent, throwing team members to the ground, bringing down sections of ceiling in cascades of rock. Lights failed. Emergency chemical lights activated, casting everything in an eerie green glow. In that chaos, Valda saw Terence one last time. He stood at the base of the formation, looking directly at her with profound sadness. "Tell them I'm sorry," he said. "Tell Nina I loved them." Then a section of floor gave way beneath him, and he vanished into darkness. The collapse lasted 30 seconds. 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. When it finally stopped, the chamber was transformed. Where Terence had stood was now a gaping fissure, easily 20 feet across, descending into darkness the chemical lights couldn't penetrate. The stone formation at the chamber's center had toppled, broken into massive fragments. Hayes's voice cut through the ringing in Valda's ears. "Sound off! Everyone report status." One by one, the team members responded. Minor injuries, cuts, bruises, one sprained wrist. But alive. All alive, except Terence, who'd fallen into that fissure without a sound after the initial crack. "Can we reach him?" Valda asked, crawling toward the edge on her hands and knees. A rescue specialist with rappelling gear moved beside her, shining a high-powered spotlight into the void. The beam fell and never found a bottom. "That's at least 200 feet, he said. "Probably more. If he went down there, he didn't need to finish. Nobody survived a fall like that." Hayes was already on her radio, trying to reach the teams they'd left at other junctions. The radio crackled with static, but eventually connected. "This is Hayes. We've had a collapse in the lower chamber. One civilian casualty. What's your status?" The response came broken and distorted. Structural instability throughout the system. "We're evacuating. Recommend immediate withdrawal." "Copy that. All teams fall back to the surface." "Repeat, all teams evacuate now." They moved as quickly as caution allowed, retracing their path through passages that now showed fresh cracks and fallen debris. Behind them, Valda could hear continued rumbling, as if the mountain itself was shifting, settling after some great disturbance. It took 90 minutes to reach the surface. When they emerged into afternoon sunlight, the relief was palpable. But Hayes's expression remained grim. She gathered the team leaders for a quick debrief. "Terence Whitlock is presumed dead from the fall. The mine system is critically unstable. We're declaring it a hazard zone and sealing all known entrances. Recovery of the body is too dangerous to attempt at this time." "What about the evidence?" one of the other agents asked. "The journals, the photographs, all the documentation we found? We got enough. The journals alone are sufficient to close multiple cold cases. We can prosecute this case even without recovering the body." But Valda noticed something in Hayes's face, a tension that suggested she was troubled by more than logistics. After the briefing dispersed, Valda approached her. "You felt it too," Valda said. "In that chamber." Hayes looked at her for a long moment before responding. "I've been investigating unusual cases for 12 years. I've been in other locations with similar characteristics. Abandoned mines, deep caves, places where people reported feeling watched or sensing presences. And yes, I've felt things I can't explain with my training. Do you think there's something real down there? Or is it just geology and psychology?" "I think," Hayes said carefully, "that some questions don't have clean answers. The magnetite deposits affect electromagnetic fields. The depth and isolation creates sensory deprivation effects. The history of the place creates psychological priming. Put all that together and people experience something. Whether that something is entirely internal or has some external component, she shrugged. I focus on what I can prove. And what I can prove is that Terence Whitlock, whether driven by mental illness or by something he genuinely experienced, hurt a lot of people. But the tremors, the timing, this region has documented seismic activity. We're near a fault line. Tremors happen. The timing was coincidental, or perhaps the structural damage from years of mining created instability that our presence triggered. You don't sound convinced. Hayes smiled without humor. I'm convinced that we close this case. That's enough. Valda returned to Granger Ridge as sunset painted the mountains gold and purple. Brynn greeted her with joy, and Valda spent several minutes just sitting on her porch, scratching the dog's ears, feeling the solid reality of home after the strangeness of the day. Sheriff Watts stopped by an hour later with takeout from the diner. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke. They're going to seal the mine permanently. Federal order. Concrete and steel over every entrance they know about. Good. The Whitlock parents want to meet with you. Thank you in person for finding their daughters. Valda nodded. I'll visit them. And the sisters, Nina specifically. She's been asking about you. Says she needs to talk to you about something Terence said in his journals. That caught Valda's attention. The FBI has those journals. Copies. But Nina apparently has a very good memory. She read some of them when she was captive. Terence would bring them down sometimes, read passages to her like he was teaching her something important. Valda set down her fork, appetite suddenly gone. What did she remember? She wouldn't tell me. Said it was for you alone. The next day, Valda made the drive back to Billings. The hospital felt familiar now. She'd made this trip several times in the past week. Nina was out of the ICU in a regular room, sitting up in a chair by the window. She'd gained more weight, her face no longer quite so skeletal. But her eyes still had that too-wide quality, still dilated more than they should. Valda, Nina's smile was genuine. I heard what happened in the mine. That Uncle Terence, he's gone, Valda said gently. He fell. The agents couldn't recover him, but they're certain he didn't survive. Nina's expression was complicated, relief mixed with grief, anger mixed with sadness. Part of me is glad. Part of me wanted him to stand trial, to explain himself to a jury, to be held accountable. And part of me just mourns the uncle I remember from childhood, before whatever happened to him in that mine destroyed who he used to be. That's natural. He was family. He used to take us fishing, Nina said, staring out the window. When we were little, he'd visit from wherever he was living, and he'd take us to the creek and teach us how to cast. He was patient and kind. And then something broke in him, and he became the man who sealed us in darkness for 5 years. She turned back to Valda. I need to tell you something, he said. Something he read to us from his journals. The FBI has the physical journals, but I remember his words. He read them to us so many times, trying to make us understand. I'm listening. He said the covenant was older than his family, that the indigenous peoples who lived here before white settlement knew about the chamber. They called it different names, but the concept was the same, a place where the boundary between sleeping and waking was thin, a place where something vast dreamed, and those dreams could leak into the waking world unless properly contained. That sounds like delusion, Valda said. Building mythology to justify his actions. Maybe, but he had research, actual historical research. He'd found accounts from the 1800s, from miners and settlers, who'd experienced strange things in these mountains. Missing time, shared dreams, encounters with something they couldn't name. The mining company that operated Coldwater, he claimed they weren't just looking for silver. They were looking for the chamber, following maps and legends passed down through certain families. Certain families like his. Yes, he said his great-great-grandfather was one of the company's founders, that the Whitlock family had been custodians of this knowledge for generations. And the covenant, the practice of keeping people in the darkness, started as a way to prevent something worse. Valda thought about the petroglyphs they'd seen, the ancient symbols predating the mine by centuries. Even if there's historical truth to some of this, it doesn't justify what he did. I know. But Valda, there's one more thing. Right before you found us, maybe a week before, we all had the same dream. All three of us, the same night. We were standing at the edge of a vast darkness, and something was rising from it. Something that had been sleeping so long, it had forgotten what waking meant. And when we were rescued, when you pulled us out early, we felt it shift, like it noticed the change in offering. Nina, you'd been in sensory deprivation for 5 years. The brain creates experiences to fill the void. Shared dreams could be explained by shared trauma and close proximity. I've told myself the same thing. Nina's hands twisted together in her lap. But I can't shake the feeling that we were released for a reason. That Terence didn't just seal us in randomly. And when the balance was broken, when he fell, you mean? When he fell, yes. The debt came due another way. A chill ran through Valda despite the warm hospital room. What are you saying? I'm saying I hope we're both wrong. I hope it's all just geology and psychology and shared delusion. But if it's not, if there's even a grain of truth in what Terence believed, then we didn't solve anything. We just changed the terms. Valda left the hospital with Nina's words echoing in her mind. She drove back toward Granger Ridge in the late afternoon, watching the mountains darken as the sun sank lower. Halfway home, she made a decision and turned onto the access road that led toward the sealed mine entrances. Yellow caution tape and hazard no entry signs marked the area now. A sheriff's deputy was stationed there, keeping curious townspeople away. He recognized Valda and waved her through after a brief conversation. She parked and walked the perimeter, Brynn at her side. The main entrance she'd discovered had been sealed with concrete already hardening. Other known openings had received similar treatment. The federal government was thorough when it wanted to be. But as Valda walked, she thought about what Gordon had said, that the tunnel system was extensive, with dozens of entrances documented over the years, and probably more that had never been officially recorded. They'd sealed the known access points, but in a mountain riddled with old mining tunnels, could you ever really seal everything? Brynn suddenly stopped walking, ears perked forward. She was staring at a section of hillside covered in brush. What is it, girl? The dog moved toward the brush, not frantically like when she'd found the sisters, but with clear purpose. Valda followed, pushing aside branches until she found what Brynn had sensed, another opening partially concealed. This one wasn't on any of the maps she'd seen. It was narrow, more of a crack in the rock than a proper entrance, but wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they were determined. Warm air exhaled from the opening, carrying that distinctive mineral smell of deep caves. And something else, a low vibration, barely perceptible, more felt than heard. Valda pulled out her phone to call Sheriff Watts to report this unsealed entrance. But before she could dial, she heard something that made her freeze, voices coming from inside the mountain. She put the phone away and pulled out her flashlight instead. Against every instinct that screamed this was foolish, she squeezed through the crack. Brynn followed, pressing close to her legs. The passage beyond was natural rather than mined, winding and irregular. The voices grew clearer as she advanced, echoing through stone in ways that made it hard to pinpoint their source. But they were definitely human voices, speaking in low, urgent tones. She rounded a corner and found herself at the edge of a small chamber. 3 men stood in the center, illuminated by battery-powered lanterns. They were in their 50s and 60s, dressed in outdoor clothing. Valda recognized one of them, Martin Holloway, who owned the hardware store in town. They saw her at the same moment she saw them, everyone freezing in mutual surprise. "Valda?" Martin said. "What are you doing down here?" "I could ask you the same thing. This mine is sealed. It's a federal hazard zone." The other 2 men exchanged glances. The older of them, weathered face, white beard, stepped forward. "My name is James Whitlock. I'm Terence's cousin. And we're down here trying to finish what he couldn't." The words hit Valda like a physical blow. "Finish what? You mean trapping more people in the dark?" "No," James said quickly. "God, no. The opposite. We're trying to end it. The covenant, the cycle, all of it. Terence believed keeping people captive was necessary, but our family was divided on that approach. Some of us thought there had to be another way to appease a delusion. It's not a delusion, the third man said quietly. He was younger, maybe 45. I'm David Whitlock, James's son. My family has lived with the knowledge of what's down here for 5 generations. We've seen what happens when the balance fails. People disappear. Animals behave strangely. The ground shakes. Dreams spread through the town like a virus. It happened in 1952 when my great-grandfather died without passing the guardianship properly. It happened in 1983 when Terence was fired and the mine closed. It's happening again now. The seismic activity is natural, Valda said, though she heard the doubt in her own voice. Then explain the dreams, James said. Half the town is reporting the same nightmare. Standing at the edge of a vast darkness, something rising from below. It started the night Terence died. And it's getting worse, Martin spoke up. I'm not even a Whitlock. I'm just a guy who runs a hardware store. But I've had those dreams every night this week. And I'm not the only one. People are scared, Valda. They don't understand why, but they feel something's wrong. Valda wanted to dismiss this as mass hysteria, as suggestion and fear feeding on itself. But she remembered the oppressive feeling in the lower chamber, the way every person there had felt watched, the coincidental timing of the tremors. What are you trying to do? She asked finally. End it, James said. Not with human sacrifice. With understanding. The chamber isn't the entity, it's a threshold. A place where something vast and old comes close to the surface. Terence thought feeding it awareness kept it asleep. We think sealing it properly, respectfully, acknowledging it and then setting boundaries, that might work better. That sounds insane. Maybe, but we're running out of time. Valda stood at the boundary between belief and disbelief, between the rational world she'd built her life on and something far stranger. She thought of her sister, lost to these mountains 30 years ago. She thought of the Whitlock sisters, surviving 5 years in impossible darkness. She thought of Terence, destroyed by whatever he'd encountered or imagined in the deep places. Show me, she said finally. Show me what you're planning. James nodded and gestured deeper into the passage. They walked for 10 minutes, the natural tunnel gradually merging with older mine works, until they reached a junction Valda recognized from the FBI operation. They were approaching the lower chamber from a different angle. As they got closer, that sense of weight returned, oppressive, attention-bearing, uncomfortable. Brynn whined softly, but stayed close to Valda's leg. The chamber had changed since the collapse. The fissure that had swallowed Terence was wider now, and from its depths came that low vibration, steady as a heartbeat. The fallen stone formation lay in fragments, but the symbols on it still seemed to catch the lantern light in strange ways. What Terence never understood, David said, kneeling near the fissure's edge, is that you can't keep something satisfied with sacrifice forever. Eventually it adapts. It begins to need more. His father knew this. That's why he tried to end the covenant but failed. The guilt of what he'd already done destroyed him. James set down a backpack and pulled out items that looked simultaneously mundane and ceremonial. Candles, salt, cloth bundles of dried sage and cedar, a large piece of quartz crystal, and a leather-bound book that looked very old. This belonged to our great-great-grandfather, James explained. The real account of what happened when he found this chamber. Not the delusion Terence built, but the actual experience and what the indigenous guides told him it meant. He opened the book carefully, showing Valda pages written in faded ink. The handwriting was clear, methodical. Dates from the 1870s. Descriptions of encounters with Northern Cheyenne and Crow elders who'd warned against digging in certain areas. They called it a sleeping place, James read aloud. Not a place where something evil dwelt, but a place where something vast dreamed. They said consciousness could slip through the boundary here if you weren't careful. That being present in this space for too long could trap part of your awareness on the other side. The solution wasn't imprisonment or sacrifice, it was respect and distance. Acknowledge it, honor it, then seal it and stay away. So what's the ritual? Valda asked, surprised by how steady her voice remained. Not a ritual exactly, David said. More like a formal boundary setting. We acknowledge what's here. We apologize for the harm our family has done. We make it clear that we're sealing this place permanently and ask respectfully that it remain dormant and contained. And you think that will work? We think it's better than what Terence was doing, and better than ignoring it entirely. They began their work. James lit candles around the chamber's perimeter, speaking words in a language Valda didn't recognize, possibly Northern Cheyenne, based on what he'd said earlier. David laid lines of salt across the passages leading to the chamber, creating a boundary. Martin arranged the crystal at the fissures edge, along with bundles of sage. And Valda found herself participating, because even if this was all psychological theater, even if there was nothing here but stone and darkness and suggestion, what harm could come from showing respect, from acknowledging the power of place and history? As they worked, that oppressive feeling began to shift, not disappearing exactly, but changing quality. Like attention that had been focused too intently was gradually pulling back. James spoke the final words, holding the old journal. We acknowledge what dwells in deep places. We honor the dreams that move beneath the world. We apologize for the harm done in misunderstanding and fear. We ask for peace and dormancy. We seal this boundary with respect and distance. The vibration from the fissure, that steady, heartbeat-like rhythm, slowed, and then stopped. The silence that followed was profound. Not the oppressive silence of being watched, but the simple quiet of stone and darkness with no presence behind it. David carefully gathered the items they'd used. We leave the salt and sage. The crystal stays at the edge, and then we seal this entrance permanently and never return. What about Terence? Valda asked. His body is down there. He made his choice, James said sadly. He spent his life believing he was the chamber's guardian. Maybe in the end he became part of it. We can't recover him, and maybe that's appropriate. They left the chamber together, returning through the narrow passages to the surface. The sun had set while they'd been underground, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Valda breathed deeply, tasting clean air, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. What happens now? She asked. Now, James said, we seal this entrance. We tell the authorities there are more openings that need concrete. And we let this place rest, finally. 3 months later, Granger Ridge wore the soft green of early spring. Snow had retreated to the highest peaks. Wildflowers were beginning to show in the meadows. And Valda Krane sat on her porch in the morning sun, watching Brynn chase a butterfly through the yard. The nightmares that had plagued the town, those shared dreams of darkness and rising, had stopped the night of the boundary setting in the chamber. Nobody could explain it. Sheriff Watts chalked it up to collective relief after Terence Whitlock's death. Agent Hayes, in her final report, attributed it to the resolution of anxiety once a predator was removed. The Whitlock cousins said nothing publicly, keeping their ritual to themselves. Valda didn't know what to believe anymore, and she'd made peace with that uncertainty. Some questions didn't have clean answers. Some experiences couldn't be neatly categorized, and maybe that was okay. The mine entrances were all sealed now. 15 locations filled with concrete and steel, marked with permanent hazard signs. The federal government had declared the entire Coldwater Ridge area geologically unstable, restricting access. Eventually, the forest would reclaim it all, hiding the scars humans had made in the mountain's face. Nina Whitlock pulled her car into Valda's driveway just after 9, as she did most Sunday mornings now. She got out slowly, still rebuilding strength, still adjusting to a world of light and space after 5 years of darkness. But she was smiling, and that smile was genuine. "Morning," Nina called. "Ready for a walk?" "Always," Valda said. They'd developed this routine over the past months. Gentle hikes, never too long, never too remote. Nina was relearning the wilderness that had imprisoned her, reclaiming it as a place of beauty rather than horror. And Valda was learning to share the mountains she'd walked alone for so many years. They took a trail through pine forest, Brynn ranging ahead but never out of sight. They talked about small things, Nina's physical therapy progress, her plans to eventually return to college, her sister's own healing journeys. Celie was in intensive counseling in Billings, Jo had moved in with an aunt in Seattle, needing distance from Montana entirely. "Do you ever think about what Uncle Terence said?" Nina asked eventually. "About the covenant and the sleeping thing and all of it." "I think," Valda said carefully, "that your uncle was a damaged man who hurt people. Whether he was driven by mental illness or by something he genuinely experienced, the result was the same. People suffered, but you felt it too. In that chamber. I can tell." Valda was quiet for a moment, watching the play of light through pine branches. "I felt something. Whether it was real or just the power of suggestion in a strange place, I don't know. And I've decided I don't need to know. How do you make peace with that? By focusing on what I can know. I know you're alive. I know your sisters are alive. I know the man responsible is gone. I know these mountains are beautiful and dangerous in entirely normal ways. Rock slides and storms and wild animals. That's enough." Nina nodded slowly. "I'm writing about it, the whole experience. Not for publication, just for me. Trying to process 5 years of darkness by putting words to it. That's good. That's healthy. I keep coming back to something you said in the hospital. You told me grief becomes part of your landscape, but doesn't have to be the whole terrain. I think that's true for trauma too. What happened will always be part of me, but I get to decide how much space it takes up." They reached an overlook, a place where the trail opened to a view of the valley below. Granger Ridge was visible in the distance, small and peaceful. Beyond it, mountains rolled away to the horizon, eternal and indifferent to human concerns. "This is where you lost your sister, isn't it?" Nina asked softly. Valda nodded. "Not this exact spot, but close. She wanted to photograph wildflowers. Such a simple thing to want. I'm sorry. Don't be. Her death taught me that loss is part of living. And more importantly, it taught me that honoring loss means helping others avoid it when possible. That's why I never stopped looking for you. That's why I'll keep doing search and rescue for as long as my body allows." Nina reached into her pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I made you something. As thanks, but also as a promise." Valda unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a new collar for Brynn, sturdy leather, expertly stitched, with a small brass compass charm attached. The compass was clearly old, well worn. "That was Uncle Terence's," Nina said. "From before he got sick. From when he was the uncle who took us fishing and told us stories. I found it in some of his things my father kept. I wanted you to have it, not as a memorial to what he became, but as a reminder that broken people were whole once, and that healing is possible." Valda's throat tightened. She attached the new collar around Brynn's neck, the compass catching the morning light. "Thank you. No, thank you. You gave me back my life, all 3 of us, our lives, our futures, our chance to heal. Brynn found us, but you didn't give up looking. That made all the difference." They stood together on that overlook, 2 women shaped by trauma, but not defined by it, choosing to face the light rather than dwell in darkness. Behind them, the mountain kept its secrets, and maybe that was for the best. Some doors once closed should stay that way. Valda touched the compass charm, feeling its weight against Brynn's collar. Then she smiled at Nina, turned toward the trail ahead, and they walked forward together into the day.